Okay, welcome back to the Investigative Journal on this October 20th, 2015 day on our calendar. I'm your host, Greg Anthony, and you're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com. You can listen to my show every evening, if you so choose, from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. That's on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Now, I'm going to make a bold statement at the outset of this show. And I'm going to say that this is probably the most important show that you will ever listen to in your life. Now, how do you know that it's the most important show you'll ever listen to in your life? Are you going to believe what I said? Now, maybe it won't be the most important show in your life. Maybe it'll be the worst show you'll ever listen to in your life. Maybe it will be the most important show. But by saying that, what I've done is imprint in your mind that this is the most important show in your life. And if you're not a free-thinking individual, you may just believe it. Now, we do a lot of talking on this show about the Vatican-led New World Order, and how the Vatican and Catholicism and Rome have meshed together with the countries of the world in order to form a one world government. So let's keep that in mind. Now, secondly, what do you think is the most important, what do you think is the best way to control a population, to lead them into the one world government or the one world order? I can say it in 2 words. Mind control. Now, being a human being growing up in this planet or in this circle, Earth, flat Earth, many people think it's a planet. Many people think it's just a flat Earth now. I grew up being mind controlled just like you. I grew up being just one of the cattle controlled by the farmers, the rulers, the controllers of this world. And because of that, they distorted the truth at a young age. And because of that, it has taken me years, countless years, to break that spell, so to speak. Now, what I'm going to do for you today, and I'm going to do this in several parts because this show, like I said, is the most important show you'll ever listen to. And the reason it is, from my mind, is that it shows how I have been mind controlled, how I got out of mind control, in a sense, and how today I consider myself a free-thinking individual, thinking much differently than I did when I was a young cow, a young piece of cattle owned by these controllers of the world. But then again, all of the things that have been given to me right now, I'm questioning. And I'm not sure that a lot of the things that I say, the answers that I give are the truth. But I surely will look at it more closely, and that's the key. So, let me give you a couple examples of mind control, how I was mind controlled when I was young, and how I got out of that mind control. Now, this could go on for hours and hours and days, and it might seem like a session in a psychiatric clinic. But isn't that really what this is all about? Now, I told you a long time ago, I chose to be a journalist, and that came about when I was about 21 or 20, about 20 years old in college. And I can tell you why I decided to do that. There were selfish reasons, and there were seemingly this exuberance of youth with all these optimistic ideas that led me into it. But it was probably one of the best and one of the worst decisions I ever made. And when I say that, I cloak it in truth because everything has a good and a bad, no matter what it may be. If you talk about spirituality, you talk about the good and the bad, and so on and so forth. But getting back to mind control, which the state, which your owners are very cognizant of, I will show you. I'm going to give you a couple small examples, and then today I'm going to give you about 20 minutes called The Story of Your Enslavement. It's more than just a feeling. I'll explain that in a minute. Now, many of you who followed my show for the last 10 years know that I used to bring on a lot of different guests all over the place. And I would spend countless hours looking for them and getting them on my show. Now, I've cut that down. I do present some live guests, and I do it in a very selective manner. It is for topics that I believe are probably the most important you'll ever listen to. That happens to be the taking away of your freedom in religion. I do a lot with the Tony Alamo Ministry because it's a story that's here right today that shows you everything regarding the taking of, or the attempt to take your mind, body, and soul by the state, by your owners, by your farmers, because they were disobedient cattle in their eyes. And so I like to bring these people on so you can hear what they're going through. But as far as a lot of the pundits that you read books and do all these videos, I don't do that much anymore. And the reason is I found that with the advent of this technology, most people show their real true colors when they tape something now, or they put it on a YouTube, or they do something that everyone can see. And that to me is their 5 minutes of fame. That is their way of showing themselves who they really are. And how do I know that? Because I do the exact same thing. I told a person the other day, they see me a lot at the store, or they talk to me regarding many crazy things that go on in the world. And I said something to them. I said, yeah, I still do my radio show. And it's that 1 hour of my life where I can really be myself in this crazy world. And so I figured that's what other people are doing too. And so I can get them to come on my show through their public statements on YouTube, on all these different shows where they interview. And so I can say to myself, I probably wouldn't get much more from them than I would if they didn't do that video. So the key is looking for people who don't do all those things. And talking to the average person like I used to do. I did a radio show years ago, and I would always have a segment called The Average Joe or something like that, where I would get somebody on that had no idea they were going in, just an average person talking about an average subject. And I found that to be more illuminating than to talk to all these pundits, because a lot of people get them all screwed up. They put George Carlin on these videos with David Icke. David Icke, to me, is a shill. George Carlin, to me, was a comedian. They put everything together, so you got a whole screwed up way of looking at everything, because everything is mixed up. Well, what I'm getting at here is mind control. You and me have been mind control, and every other human being that's lived. And the way it's done, of course, depends on your geographic location of your birth and where you live. So we're going to center on America because that was mine. My experience outside of America in my life was about 8 years in a different country, and that mind control there is different. It was different in Europe than it was here. So let me start how it started when I was a kid. When I was a kid, kind of the first thing I remember, I was born in Chicago, Illinois, during the 50s, during a time of prosperity. My dad drove a Cadillac, owned a company. The first thing I can remember is my mom and my grandmother. My grandparents lived above us in a 3-bungalow. We had all of our family living in one big house that my dad bought. And all I can remember as a kid was love. Love from my mother, my grandmother, all these things that were close to me, and I felt protected. I can't remember much what I said. I was too young, but I do remember the first day that I was going to be put into St. Mary's kindergarten. My uncle, Chester, who's no longer with us, told me this story later. And the story was this. You were the hardest, most stubborn little boy I've ever saw. We had to hold you down and tie you down and put your clothes on, and you went crying and screaming all the way to the door of that school. And when that door closed, the nuns reported back to us, and your mother and I, that you were the most obstinate person in the class saying, I want to go home, I want to go home. Now, what does that tell you? That's when my state indoctrination began. Through a Catholic school, at a Catholic kindergarten, and the indoctrination, the mind control began there. And it continued throughout my grade school years at St. John Brebeuf, St. Mary's, a couple different Catholic schools, as well as Notre Dame High School in Chicago, or Niles to be, it's right next, a suburb next to Chicago. Now I could spend, countless hours telling you all the little mind control things that happened to me, but I'm going to mention the first one. The first one was spiritual. Everything that I was told came out of a catechism book. I thought the priest was God. I thought I was in the best, the biggest, the most beautiful religion created by man, and everybody else, when I met my Lutheran friends or whatever, were just scumbags. In a sense, I didn't feel scumbags, but I felt better than them. Now, that mind control was so difficult. And it wasn't until years later, when I happened to be a journalist in Rome, that I began to unravel it and understand that it was nothing more than a system created to make me nothing more than an obedient cow. Mind controlled from the beginning about Catholicism, about a religion that was so fake. It wasn't God they were worshiping, it was sun worship. Now I could go into all the little facets of it, but I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to save it for another show. Secondly, and the only point I'm going to bring about mind control as a young man, young boy, as you were too, was my feelings about America. Freedom. We had the best government. Even though I was a young man, a young boy, watching us bomb every country in the world, I thought we were bombing them to protect ourselves, and we were the good guys, they were the bad guys. Freedom was presented to me as I felt this way. I lived in the best country in the world, and I was involved and born under the best religion in the world. When in fact it was completely opposite. I had no idea who our owners were. I didn't even think of myself as a cow or a piece of cattle. I didn't think of myself that way. I thought of myself as the most fortunate person to ever live in the world, and I was going to be and work my way up just like them. Now, when I say I chose journalism as probably the best and the worst choice I've had ever made, was that from the standpoint of wanting to grow into this system, to be one of the farmers instead of one of those farmed. Journalism was the worst profession I could have ever chosen, because it exposed me to questions that I should have never asked, questions that many millions of people don't ask. And when I started asking them and getting answers that I didn't like, there became a choice I had to make. And that choice was either to become one of the owners, a member of that farm, or to get away from it. And I chose the latter. And by getting away from it, I mean I wasn't going to be farmed in my mind anymore. Oh, they could control me in many different ways through their fake economic systems and all this, but they weren't going to control my mind anymore. And so that is why I looked, now in 2015, to people that have left the farm, have flown away from the farm. And the only way they flew away from it was because they began to understand that they were actually being cattle farmed and sold by their owners through their mind control, your mind, body, and soul being taken over by them. That's what the Pope's visit was all about. That's why Tony Alamo is in jail right now. That's why he sits there, and I thought about it the other day because I write a lot about it. And I think of a man sitting in jail for something he didn't do for all these years and all the things he did in the past that you may agree or disagree with. But the point is, he was framed by the owners because he was leading people out of the farm. He didn't want his people to be cattle, just to have their mind, body, and soul controlled by the same thing we're talking about here. And so for that, he was imprisoned by these people. He had to be put away. And now the people that I bring on my show from his ministry tell me the truth behind what they were doing. That's why I had Bert Krantz on a few times. That's why I have Deborah Andrasek. That's why I had Greg Ciego. These people that have been involved in this for years, to show you exactly what spiritual freedoms have been taken away in the guise of freedom. It's that exact meaning that freedom is slavery and slavery is freedom. And no better way to show it. When I talk about the Vatican-led New World Order, the thing that differentiates this show from many is that we include the spiritual aspect of this. We don't just wrap it, say that the government is bad and all, the New World Order has taken over because of these despot leaders. No, it's much deeper than that. It goes to sun worship. It goes to Satanism. It goes to this combination of Rome, the papal authority, and the governments all in line to farm you away, sell you away. And I'm going to say one thing. What do you think? You hear all these words. We're in debt. America's never going to be able to pay its debts. We're broke. America's dollar is falling. What does that mean? Ask yourself the question. When we loan trillions of dollars to foreign countries like China, and you can name any country in the world, how are we going to pay back our creditors? When they loan money to us, when we do this kind of thing, how are we going to pay back our debts when China loans us billions of dollars? What are we going to do? What's the government going to do? They don't have any money. It's not dollars. It's not land. They are selling you. Yes, they are selling your freedoms. They are selling your family to the foreign governments, because that's their only asset. It's their cattle. And that's exactly what you are. And better to know it and to understand it than to go on blindly being farmed by your owners, by the Vatican-led New World Order owners in both spiritual and secular ways. Now, I've got about 3 or 4 minutes. And what I want to say to you is think about if you're starting to realize you don't want to be on the farm anymore, you don't want to be a farmed animal, and you want to fly away and get off the farm. Think about all the things in your mind that you've been controlled in the beginning. That's the key to this whole thing. And that's because we live in this stage, and it's coming to an end. Yes, it is. This era is coming to an end soon. And what I'm getting at is think back when you were a child. And in the shows this week, next couple shows, we'll go through a lot of them. A lot of my own experiences are probably similar to yours. Because as young little cows and young little calves, that's how we grew up. And that was the first taste of indoctrination by our controllers, by our owners, by our farmers. And so you have to ask yourself, what ways was I mind controlled? What was my personal experience in it? What did I think about a lot of things? First of all, what did I think about my education? What did I think about the gods, the God that I grew up under? What did I think about all these different things? The government, the wars, the orchestration of all of these things around. What was my original thoughts about it? And how slowly did I become one of those, either with wings flying off the farm or sitting there on that perched up thinking I have to get out. And if I get out, where do I go? Well, there's a couple really good answers. And I'll get to those in the second half of this show. And I told you didn't I say at the beginning this will be the most important show that you'll ever listen to in your life? Now, are you just going to believe me? Just like you believe your government leaders when they tell you all these crazy, they don't care about you. But you believe them. You probably believe more people that want to control you, own you, be your farmers, than a simple statement like I'm making. This is the most important show in your life. Now the real question becomes, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And you have to use that same principle when you hear anything coming out of the mouth of your farmers, the people who own you, the Pope, your leaders who have put there to just basically echo what this whole New World Order wants them to say. But you're going to believe them? You think they're protecting you? Think again. We're going to come back in the next half hour, and I'm going to play for you the story of your enslavement. It's more important than just a feeling. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening. Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased. It has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie, with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character, as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy, in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Okay, we're back on the Investigative Journal on this October 20th, 2015. Most important show you'll ever listen to in your life. Now, I could go on and on about all the things that the New World Order and the Vatican have done to you. And I've done that throughout the last 10 years. But this show, I want to center on the way they get to this point. The way it's going to be in the future because of two words: mind control. It can't happen. This New World Order this Vatican-led New World Order of spiritualism that's taking place right before our eyes can't happen without mind control. That's why it's important for you to know how you've been mind controlled and how, in a sense, to fly away from the farm. Don't be a farmed piece of cattle anymore. And I'm going to show you through this presentation that it's on a channel called Do You See What I See? Kind of like that, taken from an old song. And you will really, I've got a couple minutes here to introduce it. It's only about 20 minutes long. But I think you'll see what I mean in the importance of understanding in every aspect of your life how the owners, through the world leaders and through the systems throughout history that have been basically orchestrated, especially from the time of Rome, by this organization that wants to lead everyone under their control. Now, somebody sent me a little story regarding what's going on in Kazakhstan, the New World Order city capital, that this huge, monstrous capital is being built. There's no even coverage of it in the West. In Kazakhstan, the president of Kazakhstan is building the city of the future with the Pyramid of Peace, and all the buildings are going to represent one thing: a one world government and a one world religion, sun worship. Go to it. Look for the 21st century city in Kazakhstan. That's about all I'll say on that. But let's look at this presentation, because this is going to tell you, in kind of a nutshell, presented quite well, very intellectual approach to mind control and how it's progressed through the centuries. The story of your enslavement, folks. So listen. Do you see what I see?
This is the story of your enslavement, how it came to be, and how you can finally be free. Like all animals, human beings want to dominate and exploit the resources around them. At first, we mostly hunted and fished and ate off the land, but then something magical and terrible happened to our minds. We became, alone among the animals, afraid of death and of future loss. And this was the start of a great tragedy and an even greater possibility. You see, when we become afraid of death, of injury and imprisonment, we become controllable and so valuable in a way that no other resource could ever be. The greatest resource for any human being to control is not natural resources or tools or animals or land, but other human beings. You can frighten an animal because animals are afraid of pain in the moment, but you cannot frighten an animal with a loss of liberty, with torture or imprisonment in the future, because animals have very little sense of tomorrow. You cannot threaten a cow with torture or a sheep with death. You cannot swing a sword at a tree and scream at it to produce more fruit, or hold a burning torch to a field and demand more wheat. You cannot get more eggs by threatening a hen, but you can get a man to give you his eggs by threatening him. This human farming has been the most profitable and destructive occupation throughout history, and it is now reaching its destructive climax. Human society cannot be rationally understood until it is seen for what it is: a series of farms where human farmers own human livestock. Some people get confused because governments provide healthcare and water and education and roads, and thus imagine that there is some benevolence at work. Nothing could be further from the reality. Farmers provide healthcare and irrigation and training to their livestock. Some people get confused because we are allowed certain liberties and thus imagine that our governments protect our freedoms. But farmers plant their crops a certain distance apart to increase their yields, and will allow certain animals larger stalls or fields if it means they will produce more meat and milk. In your country, your tax farm, your farmer grants you certain freedoms, not because he cares about your liberties, but because he wants to increase his profits. Are you beginning to see the nature of the cage you were born into? There have been 4 major phases of human farming. The first phase in ancient Egypt was direct and brutal human compulsion. Human bodies were controlled, but the creative productivity of the human mind remained beyond the reach of the whip and the brand and the shackles. Slaves remained woefully underproductive and required enormous resources to control. The second phase was the Roman model, wherein slaves were granted some capacity for freedom, ingenuity, and creativity, which raised their productivity. This increased the wealth of Rome, and thus the tax income of the Roman government, and with this additional wealth Rome became an empire, destroying the economic freedoms that fed its power, and collapsed. I'm sure that this does not seem entirely unfamiliar. After the collapse of Rome, the feudal model introduced the concept of livestock ownership and taxation. Instead of being directly owned, peasants farmed land that they could retain as long as they paid off the local warlords. This model eventually broke down due to the continual subdivision of productive land and was destroyed during the enclosure movement when land was consolidated and hundreds of thousands of peasants were kicked off their ancestral lands because new farming techniques made larger farms more productive with fewer people. The increased productivity of the later Middle Ages created the excess food required for the expansion of towns and cities, which in turn gave rise to the modern democratic model of human ownership. As displaced peasants flooded into the cities, a huge stock of cheap human capital became available to the rising industrialists, and the ruling class of human farmers quickly realized that they could make more money by letting their livestock choose their own occupations. Under the democratic model, direct slave ownership has been replaced by the mafia model. The mafia rarely owns businesses directly, but rather sends thugs around once a month to steal from the business owners. You are now allowed to choose your own occupation, which raises your productivity, and thus the taxes you can pay to your masters.
Value this time in your life, kids, because this is the time in your life when you still have your choices. And it goes by so fast. When you're a teenager, you think you can do anything, and you do. Your 20s are a blur. 30s, you raise your family, you make a little money, and you think to yourself, what happened to my 20s? 40s, you grow a little pot belly, you grow another chin. The music starts to get too loud. One of your old girlfriends from high school becomes a grandmother. 50s, you have a minor surgery. You'll call it a procedure, but it's a surgery. 60s, you'll have a major surgery. The music is still loud, but it doesn't matter because you can't hear it anyway. 70s, you and the wife retire to Fort Lauderdale. Start eating dinner at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You have lunch around 10, breakfast the night before. Spend most of your time wandering around malls looking for the ultimate soft yogurt and muttering, how come the kids don't call? How come the kids don't call? The 80s, you'll have a major stroke. You end up battling with some Jamaican nurse who your wife can't stand, but who you call mama. Any questions?
Your few freedoms are preserved because they are profitable to your owners. The great challenge of the democratic model is that increases in wealth and freedom threaten the farmers. The ruling classes initially profit from a relatively free market in capital and labor, but as their livestock become more used to their freedoms and growing wealth, they begin to question why they need rulers at all. Ah well, nobody ever said that human farming was easy. Keeping the taxed livestock securely in the compounds of the ruling classes is a three-phase process. The first is to indoctrinate the young through government, quote, education. As the wealth of democratic countries grew, government schools were universally inflicted in order to control the thoughts and souls of the livestock. The second phase is to turn citizens against each other through the creation of dependent livestock. It is very difficult to rule human beings directly through force, and where it can be achieved, it remains cripplingly underproductive, as can be seen in North Korea. Human beings do not breed well or produce efficiently in direct captivity. But if human beings believe that they are free, then they will produce much more for their farmers. The best way to maintain this illusion of freedom is to put some of the livestock on the payroll of the farmer. Those cows that become dependent on the existing hierarchy will then attack any other cows who point out the violence, hypocrisy, and immorality of human ownership.
Officers positioned Grant face first on the floor with one officer near his head, a second near his back, and a third officer standing nearby. There appeared to be a brief struggle. Then, a 2-year veteran BART officer stands, draws his weapon, and fires.
Freedom is slavery, and slavery is freedom. If you can get the cows to attack each other whenever anybody brings up the reality of their situation, then you don't have to spend nearly as much controlling them directly. Those cows who become dependent upon the stolen largesse of the farmer will violently oppose any questioning of the virtue of human ownership, and the intellectual and artistic classes, always and forever dependent upon the farmers, will say to anyone who demands freedom from ownership, "You will harm your fellow cows." The livestock are thus kept enclosed by shifting the moral responsibility for the destructiveness of the violent system to those who demand real freedom. The third phase is to invent continual external threats so that the frightened livestock cling to the protection of the farmers. This system of human farming is now nearing its end. The terrible tragedies of modern Western economic systems has occurred not in spite of, but because of past economic freedoms. The massive increases in Western wealth throughout the 19th century resulted from economic freedoms. And it was this very increase in wealth that fed the size and power of the state. Whenever the livestock become exponentially more productive, you get a corresponding increase in the number of farmers and their dependents. The growth of the state is always proportional to the preceding economic freedoms. Economic freedoms create wealth, and the wealth attracts more thieves and political parasites, whose greed then destroys the economic freedoms. In other words, freedom metastasizes the cancer of the state. The government that starts off the smallest will always end up the largest. This is why there can be no viable and sustainable alternative to a truly free and peaceful society. A society without political rulers, without human ownership, without the violence of taxation and statism. truly free is both very easy and very hard. We avoid the horror of our enslavement because it is so painful to see it directly. We dance around the endless violence of our dying system because we fear the attacks of our fellow livestock. But we can only be kept in the cages we refuse to see. Wake up. To see the farm is to leave it.
The state of the union is not good.
Our trade deficit is too large. We must not go back to unwise spending.
This is America.
George Orwell once wrote that the great enemy of clear language is insincerity. When there is a gap between one's real and one's declared aims, one turns, as it were, instinctively to long words and exhausted idioms, like a cuttlefish spurting out ink. You've probably heard confusing phrases like the trade deficit, the falling dollar, the national debt, unfunded liabilities, and so on, which all sound vague and actuarial and vaguely, well, not me. The reality behind these accounting phrases is perfectly monstrous. When someone, a foreigner say, loans money to the American government, what are they getting in return? Well, they are getting promises of interest payments and eventual repayment of the principal. Where does your government get this money? The government is not a business. It does not generate profits in the free market. So where does it get the money to repay its creditors? Are you beginning to understand that it is not dollars that are being sold, or bonds, or agency debt, or treasuries, or anything like that? Where is your government going to get the money to pay off its creditors? It's not pieces of paper, or contracts, or computer bits that are being sold. There is only one thing that the government has to sell. Governments have only one asset that they can use as collateral. Your leaders are selling you. When China lends $800 billion to your government, what they get in return is a guarantee that $10,000 plus interest will be taken from your family at gunpoint and shipped overseas. When a farmer gets a loan from a bank, he uses his livestock as collateral. It is the milk and meat his cows will produce in the future that he will use to pay off his loan. The bank is buying a share in his cows. You are the livestock that your leaders use as collateral. The leaders that you cheer for and throw parades for and drop balloons behind and donate money to are selling you to Chinese rulers, to the Japanese, to the Nigerians, to South American drug lords with accounts in the Caribbean banking centers, to Russia, to Korea, to Egypt, to Colombia, to Chile, to the Philippines, to Malaysia, and anyone else who is willing to give them a few dollars in return for the blood, sweat, and toil of your future. The flag that you praise and the anthems that you sing and the rulers that you weep and kneel before have as much loyalty to you as a plantation owner had to his slaves. And sadly, plantation slaves had more pride than we do. Plantation slaves did not generally praise their masters for selling them off, for auctioning off the lives, hopes, dreams, and futures of their own little children. We can understand that cattle may lick the hand of the farmer who lowers an axe to its neck, because cattle are dumb beasts that cannot comprehend their real relationship with the farmer and his imminent plans for them. is our excuse? When we chant, USA, USA, USA. When we cheer and bow and beg and scrape and sing and weep with joy that some new farmer now presides over the wholesale dismantling and sale of our families' futures. When we love with obsessive emptiness the leaders who laugh while they auction us off to every tin pot dictator and stockbroker the world over, what is our excuse? Has our pride been so broken that we lunge with pathetic joy at every new silver-tongued demagogue who pretends to care for us even a tiny little bit? In the future, our children will demand to know why we knelt and cheered as they were sold off on the auctioneer's block. This video, and my life's work, is my answer to my child. What's yours?
Okay, not a bad presentation, in a nutshell, the story of your enslavement. But that last question, what's your excuse? I can tell you right now, if one wants to know mine, I can point to 10 years of shows trying to teach people this, whether it be economically viable or not. The mind control to teach people to get out of it. But so many are confused. Where are the answers? Where do you go? Remember when he said in that little presentation, and I said earlier in the show, to be truly free is to fly away from the farm and the control? Where do you fly to? I think many of my shows talk about it. And I think you know what I'm going to not say, because I want you to answer that question. Where do you think you can go? And what is your excuse now for bowing down to the flag, for bowing down to American freedom, for bowing down to the Pope if you're one of those that do? What is your excuse? Why would you do it? Is the question. And my answer is because you are mind controlled. My answer is simple. I do not bow down to this government or to its flag. I do not bow down to the Pope. In fact, I almost can't listen to it anymore. When I hear that national anthem, when I hear anything resembling to a Catholic Mass, my body begins to quiver and shake, almost as if it's repelling it away. What's your excuse if you still do? And if you don't, if you're one of those lucky ones who isn't mind controlled any longer, help people understand where to go, where you can fly to. I'd love to hear your answers to that. I'm only presenting it to you, and I'd love to hear your answers. Good night. See you tomorrow.